Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this specialist training on dangerous goods regulations. The transportation of dangerous goods plays a very important role in global trade, but it also poses very significant health, safety, environmental, and property risks. In this training, we'll be looking at how the dangerous goods is managed and what are the regulations pertaining to these dangerous goods. To do that, this training has 10 sessions. The first session will look at the introduction of the Dangerous Goods Regulation through the United Nations recommendation of the transport of dangerous goods, also known as the Purple Book. We'll be delving into understanding how this regulation is being implemented in the UK and in the EU. Furthermore, we'll be looking at post-Brexit impact to this regulation, whether there have been any divergence and how those divergences look like. We'll also delve into a relevant case law or case study on the impact of Brexit to the dangerous goods regulation. The key learning point in this session will be to understand the dangerous goods regulatory landscape and why compliance matters. In session 2, we'll be looking at the transportational model requirements and looking at the key differences. Those requirements include 4 regulatory framework: the ADR, which regulate road transport, the RID, which regulate rail transport, the IMDG code that regulate sea transport, and the IATA DGR that regulate air transport. In this session, we need to understand these regulatory frameworks, how are they applied, how are they implemented, and the compliance requirements that are embedded within these regulatory frameworks. The key lesson here will be to understand the mode-specific compliance and restrictions related to each framework. Session 3 will be looking at the classification of dangerous goods. In this session, we will need to understand 9 hazard classes and their subdivision. We need to understand how these hazards have been classified in section 14 of the safety data sheets. We'll also need to learn how to identify and apply the UN numbers and proper shipping names. Furthermore, we'll have to understand the packing groups and their significance in risk management. In terms of the environmental impact, we need to understand the impact of IMDG code in terms of the marine pollutant categories. And special precautions will also be looked at in terms of looking at additional safety measures that should be taken during transportation. Furthermore, details for shipment in bulks under the IBC code will also be looked at. And case study that is relevant to the classification of dangerous goods in terms of 9 hazard classes will also be looked at. The key learning points here are to be able to correctly classify substances and interpret hazard labels. The training furthermore goes into session 4. In session 4, we'll be looking at packing requirements as provided by the United Nations approved packaging. We'll be looking at compatibility chart, which chemicals are compatible with which. We'll be looking at the performance test for packaging, that is the drop test, the leak proofness test, the staking test, the vibration, pressure, and temperature cycling test. We'll further be looking at the case study that is relevant in terms of packaging requirement. The key learning point in this session will be able to learn how to select and verify compliant packaging. Session 5 looks at labeling and marking. Under labeling and marking, we'll be looking at hazard symbols, different types of hazard symbols, different types of transport labels, and be able to understand the differences between those two. And also we'll be looking at the relevant case study. The key learning point in this session will be to ensure proper marking to prevent regulatory breaches. Then we'll move into section 6. Section 6 deals with documentation and transport papers. Documentations like the dangerous good notes, the safety data sheets, the transport emergency cards, also known as the TREM cards, the consignment note, certificate of packaging compliance, the driver's ADR certificate, and within those documentations, we look at the requirements and measures for non-compliance. Relevant case study will also be sought to address the gaps. The key learning point in this session will be to enable us to prepare and check mandatory documentation. Then we delve into Session 7. Session 7 deals with storage and handling. Under this session, we'll be looking at the segregation principles. We'll be looking at the warehousing ventilation. We'll be looking at spill containment. And furthermore, we'll be looking at the relevant case studies that is going to support us in terms of understanding how storage and handling is operated. The key learning points in this session will be the implementation of safe and handling procedures, as well as emergency readiness. Session 8 deals with emergency response and incident management. In this session, we'll be looking at the spill response strategies. We'll be looking at fire safety, reporting obligations. Furthermore, we'll also be looking at relevant case study that will be supporting us in terms of understanding the emergency response and incident management. The key learning points here will be to develop strategies and measures that will be able to help us to respond to accidents. And then we have Session 9 that looks at the roles and responsibilities. So under these roles and responsibilities, we look at what are the key responsibilities for DGSA. We look at the driver's obligations under the roles and responsibilities. We look at the employer's duties, and of course, the relevant case law, or case study in this case, to be able to understand how these roles and responsibilities can impact the dangerous goods regulation. The key learning points here will be to clarify accountability and legal responsibilities. The last session, this is session 10, we'll be looking at training and competency requirements. That will be for the ADR driver, the awareness training that needs to be conducted, the refresher cycles, and competency verification. The key lesson here in this session is to enable companies to build compliance culture through continuous learning. Thank you very much.